This video is for Ukrainians who are in Canada under CUAET status and are looking to extend their stay in Canada. My name is Oля Sanishin and I'm an immigration lawyer in Ontario. Now, if you are in Canada under CUAET measures and if you arrived in Canada before March 31st, 2024, you now have a deadline before March 31st, 2025 to submit an application to extend your stay in Canada for an additional 3 years, provided that your passport and your biometrics are still valid. It's an extraordinary measure that Ukrainians were given an opportunity to have open work permits in Canada, and I think it's a great opportunity, and I encourage everybody to apply to extend their status while they still can. Each family member has to extend their own status, so if you have children, each of them has to extend their validity of documents as well, so study permits, visitor records, or work permits have to be extended. Now, today we will talk about what to do if your passports are expiring soon or if you no longer have a valid passport. This video is recorded for informational purposes only, and it's not intended to be legal advice. I encourage you to get legal advice about your specific circumstances. So, if you're in a situation when your passport is expiring soon, but you are able to extend its validity or get a new passport soon if you already had the passport requested, or if you have an appointment at the consulate to extend your passport soon, you're just not going to be able to do it before March 31st, 2025. In that case, I would still suggest to submit an online application for extension of status before the deadline, before March 31st, 2025. In that application, I would, if you already know the new date for your new passport or the new extension date, you could already put the new end date for the passport if you know that. If you don't, you can put the current date of your current expiration of passport, but if you're applying with an expiring passport, I highly recommend including an explanation letter, and in that explanation letter, you want to say that you're in the process of extending the validity of your passport, or you're in the process of obtaining a new passport. You should say that you will provide it to IRCC via web form as soon as it's available, and request immigration not to make a decision on your application until a new passport is provided. So that will give you a little bit of time to sort out the passport situation, and chances are by the time IRCC starts processing your application, you will already have a passport, and it's your job to provide it to IRCC as soon as it's available. I think it makes sense to do that if you think you're going to have an opportunity to resolve the passport situation sometime this year. And while you're figuring that out, if you have an online application in process, it will give you maintain status. Maintain status means that your status remains the same. So if you had a work permit and it's expiring, even if it expired but you submitted an application online before the expiration date, you will have the same status and you will be able to continue working in Canada while the online application is being processed. Now, IRCC is aware that Ukrainians are having issues with extending passports, and they're asking to explain your efforts as to when you're going to get the new passport done, or what efforts you made to renew or extend the validity of your passport. Now, if it's not possible to renew or extend your passport this year or in the near future, I would recommend two things. So option one is you can apply online for an open work permit before March 31st, 2025. That's a deadline anyways. Such application online would allow you to have maintained status while the application is listed as in progress. In that application, you'll have to indicate the current end date of your current passport. And in the explanation letter, you would include that you're asking for a work permit for 3 years under the post-CUAET measures. You would explain all the efforts that you've taken to extend the validity of your passport, or explain why you're not able to get the passport, why it's impossible. And in that explanation, you can then request to waive the passport requirement and process the work permit application without a valid passport. IRCC did say that they will process Ukrainian application on a case-by-case basis. However, I think it's highly unlikely that they will issue a new work permit without a valid passport. In such application, you can also ask for, in the alternative, to be able to make further submissions on a temporary resident permit application before the decision is made. Now, this will likely not result in you getting a new work permit for 3 years, but it will give you a little bit of more time and it will maintain your status as a worker while you try and figure out your situation. So there's also a rule for those people who come from countries that are on the administrative deferral removal list, that they are allowed to get a work permit while they're in Canada. So Ukraine is currently on the administrative deferral removal list, meaning that the deportations to Ukraine are temporarily suspended. So that allows Ukrainian nationals in Canada ask for a work permit based on Ukraine being on this ADR list. However, in the context of this application, and if you're applying before March 31st, 2025, I would probably not recommend saying that, and I probably wouldn't recommend requesting a work permit based on the Ukraine being on the ADR list, because that's an easy solution for the immigration officer to grant you such a work permit, but such work permit's not necessarily going to be for 3 years. And work permits issued based on this ADR rule are usually, well, not usually, they do not grant temporary resident status. So a work permit like that would allow you to continue working, but it would say it does not confer temporary resident status, meaning that you're without status in Canada. So I wouldn't ask that, but remember that's always an option even after March 31st, for as long as Ukraine remains on that ADR list, for as long as the situation in Ukraine is unstable. And now option 2 is to apply for a temporary residence permit and ask for a work permit as well. Now, an application for a temporary residence permit is for those people who are inadmissible to Canada. So in the case of expiring passports, this would be for those people who don't have a passport, don't have a valid passport anymore, or have a passport expiring soon and not able to extend it. Basically, as soon as your passport expires, your status in Canada expires and you will be likely inadmissible. So in that case, you will likely need a temporary residence permit. So that's a paper-based application. You cannot submit that application online. You'll have to submit a paper-based application. In that application, you will also ask for a work permit. Now, such applications may take a long time to process. It could be a couple of months, it could be even a year. While that application is being processed, you do not have maintained status, so it doesn't allow you to continue doing whatever you've been doing. It doesn't allow you to continue working. In that application, I would still suggest to include all the explanation about your efforts to get a new passport, include why you're not able to get a new passport, include explanation about the situation in Ukraine and why you cannot go there, and request for a work permit under the post-CUAET measures. So you can still request a work permit for up to 3 years. In that case, you should submit a TRP application on paper before March 31st. You have to mail it before that deadline and keep a record of mailing, so maybe a tracking number from that envelope that you submit the application in. That application has fees, which are $239.75 for temporary resident permit, TRP it's called, and $255 for an open work permit. Now, study permit and visitor record are a little bit cheaper in terms of the fees. Study permit would be $150 for the fees, and visitor record it's $100 for CIC fees we're talking. Now, to maximize your opportunity to continue working in Canada, if you're in a situation that your passport is expiring very soon, I would suggest to do these two options in conjunction. So submit an online application, which would allow you to continue working in Canada while that application is in progress, which realistically will take a couple of months. And then in the meantime, also submit an application for a temporary resident permit plus a work permit, which would take a couple of months or longer to process. And then by the time your online application is either rejected or canceled, or you may be issued a work permit for the duration of your passport, which doesn't really help the situation. But by the time that application is dealt with, you may already have a resolution on your temporary residence permit application, which would give you hopefully another 3 years. If you already have an online application in process, so like if you already submitted an application either last year or recently, do not submit a new one. Instead, I recommend to check with IRCC or just double check if you included everything in that application. So a common reason for refusal is if you didn't pay CAC fees, at some point Ukrainians were exempt. That was until March 31st, 2024. So if you submitted your application recently or since then, you would have to pay the fees. Now, that's a common reason for refusals. Like if the application does not have the fees paid, make sure that you send the receipt to IRCC. If you've included some documents without translations, that could be a reason for refusal if those are mandatory documents, for example, a marriage certificate. If you got a request from IRCC to do biometrics, to do medical exam, or to provide any further documents, and if you ignored that request or didn't respond to it within the dedicated deadline, that would give immigration a reason to refuse your application. So just make sure that everything in that application is being dealt with appropriately, and for that, make sure that you're checking your application regularly for updates. You would get updates in your email. You would get a notification that there is a new message in your online account. So I advise you to check your online account regularly to make sure that you don't miss any time-sensitive requests for IRCC. Now, these are the options for those that are in Canada, and if you want to submit your application before March 31st to take advantage of a possibility to get an open work permit for another 3 years. After March 31st, we're not clear how the situation is going to evolve. Like, there are general options non-specific to Ukrainians. However, they all have some limitations. So, for example, there used to be a general policy for family members of temporary foreign workers. So if, for example, a husband has a work permit, then a wife and kids under 22 who are considered family members could submit an application for an open work permit. But that was recently changed. As of January 21st, open work permits for spouses would only be allowed if your spouse is working in a tier 0 or tier 1 occupation. Then the other spouse can submit an open work permit application, or for spouses of tier 2 and tier 3, only specific occupations. And then the work permit must be valid for 16 months. So, for example, in a situation where a husband has a valid work permit, or I guess the wife has a valid work permit, it has to be valid for 16 months, and she has to work either in a tier 0, tier 1, or specific tier 2 or tier 3 occupations for the husband to qualify for an open work permit under that policy. Then there's always an option to get a closed work permit with LMIA if your employer is willing to provide support for that. Now, that's usually a time-consuming option, and depending on your employer, it may or may not be available to you. You would be able to get an open work permit if you make a refugee claim in Canada. However, that has serious consequences, and that changes your status from CUAET to refugee claimant. So I strongly encourage to consult with a lawyer if you're considering that option. If you already have a permanent residency application in progress, it would allow you, depending on the kind of application, there is a possibility to get a bridging work permit. For economic, federal, and provincial programs, you can apply for a bridging work permit only after you already received acknowledgement of receipt from federal or provincial from the government. Both main applicant and their spouse can apply for an open work permit. In that case, also, if your passport is expiring soon, you can always ask for an exemption from the requirement of a valid passport. This exemption could be requested in any application. You would have to include some detailed submissions based on agency grounds. Now, if you have an HNC application in progress, that by default does not allow you to get an open work permit. Only after you receive stage 1 approval or approval in principle, then you can apply with that letter, you can apply for an open work permit. And in that case, you can also ask for a requirement to be waived to have a valid passport. So what that means is you can get an open work permit without a valid passport, but only after you have stage 1 approval or approval in principle. And all family members could be included in that request. So everybody can get an open work permit after they turn 14, and as long as they have stage 1 approval in principle. And also, if you have a spousal sponsorship application in progress, if it's an inland spousal sponsorship, it allows the applicant to also have an open work permit while the application is being processed. So There are options available, but timing is crucial right now. I do recommend for everyone to apply before March 31st, 2025. Even if you previously applied for an extension, it does not prevent you from applying again. So there's no limit on how many times you can apply. I do not suggest to have more than one application in progress at any given time, but even if you previously applied and got an extension, you can still try and use this opportunity to apply for another extension, and you can get a work permit for up to 3 years. Usually it's 3 years from the time when the work permit is issued. So if you apply now and your work permit is issued in, say, May 2025, it would be valid till May 2028 if your passport is valid until then. So final tips: act quickly, make sure that everything is included in that application, because if your application is rejected, then you may not have an opportunity to reapply. Consider your options, especially consider your options if your passport is expiring soon. And if in doubt, if you're not sure what to do with your situation, make sure to get legal advice. I work with Pro Bono Ontario at their hotline, where we provide legal advice for Ukrainians every day from Monday to Friday, and until March 31st, we will be working. So if you still have any questions left, you can call me at 1-855-255-7256 every day from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. Thank you for watching this video, and good luck with your applications.